everyone. Welcome to the new Spatial Realities talk with NOOMA Studio, Calum, Duncan, and Karl, Lenton. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction into Architecture Fringe, the new Spatial Realities project, and what today's talk is going to be all about. So Architecture Fringe is a grassroots volunteer-led community interest company, and we are based in Scotland. However, our projects come from all around the UK and beyond. This is the 5th edition of the festival, and we're responding to a provocation of unlearning, where we're inviting everyone to interrogate our own behaviors and biases and acknowledge how the world really is, and then reimagine how it could be. New Spatial Realities represents the next iteration of our ongoing New Typologies program of commissioned work. In 2017, we had teams reimagining the civic infrastructure and reinterpreting existing buildings. In 2018, Frankentypes explored the hybrid building typologies, and in 2019, Retypes invited the contributors to consider the adaptive reuse of redundant building types in the light of the societal change and the climate emergency. So as part of this core program this year, in June, New Spatial Realities is a research and design project which invited participants to view the existing urban fabric from their own perspective and pursue a line of research and interrogation that responds to their own experiences and shared practices. We've invited 4 collaborating teams who are Civic Soup, Migrants Bureau, NOOMA Studio, Raising the Roof, and Voices of Experience. So the 4 teams were asked to explore the provocation of unlearning and have asked the teams to kind of look at the questions of how we identify and define space, and what does the space express, and how social negotiations, ownership, access, community, aesthetics, and materials are expressed in space. A little bit about each of the teams participating. So we had Civic Soup exploring the relationship with wet spaces that happened last Friday. Migrants Bureau will be exploring food landscapes in Bristol, and Raising the Roof and Voices of Experience will be exploring the kind of care, the later living in a care home culture at the end of this week. However, today we're here with NOOMA Studio, who are an interdisciplinary collective of architects and creatives based in London. Founded on diversity, NOOMA's work focuses on creating accessible, people-led spaces throughout collaborative co-creation. NOOMA are in learning through play and have created a zine titled Lost in Play that explores the collective-led storytelling and captures a screenshot of the creative discourse in their studio. We have 4 speakers today. Ramzi Yassa is an architect and director of NOOMA Studio. Francis Leung, who's a designer with NOOMA Studio. We have Karl Lenton, a founder and creative director of Seeds Education, where it's an organization that invites students to engage imaginatively with environment through architecture and design within prison culture. And we have our host today, who's Calum Duncan. He's a RIA Sustainable Building Design and RIBA Conservation Accredited Architect and Director at Calum Duncan Architects, alongside being a chair of the Board of Directors at Play Scotland. Before we jump into the talk, just want to give you a quick run through of how the talk today is going to work. We're going to have a quick discussion. Ramzi, Calum, Karl, and Francis will lead a discussion on topic of play. From about 1 o'clock, we're going to have an interactive workshop using a Miro board. And afterwards, we're going to come back and do a little conclusion. At the start, there's going to be a link to a Miro board shared. If you could please click on that and just register while the conversation is going to start thinking about the provocation of play. And now I'm just going to introduce the Lost in Play zine, which we're currently working alongside NOOMA and the contributors and collaborators and friends of the NOOMA Studio, alongside Good Press, to publish the zine at the end of the festival. And today's workshop will actually inform the second number of the zine. I'm now going to hand over to Ramzi who's going to talk a little bit more about the zine and what's inspired NOOMA to create this particular provocation under the unlearning topic.
Wow, thank you, Ruta. What an amazing introduction. And firstly, I'd like to say thanks very much to the team at Architecture Fringe for putting on such an awesome festival. And thank you very much to our host, Calum, today for coming in to help lead this discussion. We were approached by the Fringe to with a very stripped down, simple brief to respond to the theme of unlearning. Now we really like that. We like making our own briefs, but it was a real challenge in itself, you know, which we took on really well. And for us from the outset, what was really important about this was being able to address some of our key themes in the studio, which are around the theme of collectivity, playfulness, a narrative, and conversation. You know, because we are a really conversational studio, and we went round in circles a few times thinking about how we capture all of those things, and the most obvious answer was staring us in the face, which was really just to capture all of those themes in a zine. It really felt like the most appropriate format for us to really capture those themes. So I'm going to take you all through a few pages of the zine now, just give you a very kind of brief introduction to how it was put together, who contributed to it. As Ruta mentioned, it is available to download for free on the Architecture Fringe website, but it will also be reso printed to a limited edition number and will be made available to purchase from the Good Press website, as well as some other good bookshop outlets. And we're also planning to sell copies on our website eventually. So I'll just share the screen with everybody. So you can see that the subtitle for the zine is Collective Personal Storytelling, which is something that came out of one of our projects. And we kind of found that that's a really good way of kind of capturing, you know, what our studio does really, and what we try to capture. And you know, as you can see, we're all kind of there, you know, having a collective conversation within these characters here. Some of the really key contributors have been people like Viktor Vorsky and Anton Chernikov, who came together to put together this spread. Within our studio, we also have a writer who's Morgan Dunn. He's a copywriter, and he writes content for us based around our themes. So he's written some essays which have been contributed as well. And Bikrant Pakrin, who should be with us in the audience today, who might be able to share a few words about his spread and some of the ideas there. And really key for us was really just having a play with some of our kind of existing projects and you know, seeing how these can be kind of re-editorialized and repositioned to kind of contribute to a new narrative. This is a contribution from a very key member of the studio, which is Farouk Goro, based on the ideas of kind of alternative theories in architecture and music and Afrofuturism. And a really awesome contribution here from David Franklin on his classical training as a pianist, but how he's finding an opportunity to unlearn through playing with synths and tape decks. And some very serious topics around unlearning as well. This is an essay and live project undertaken by Karl Lenton, who's with us on the panel today, around unlearning within the penal system and how we can, you know, his Seeds project is really all about using play and unlearning for young offenders to teach them architecture and teach them an architectural program. And we also have contributions here from our friends over at Centric Lab, which is a research body looking at the connection between health and the urban environment, and really, you know, studying the kind of lexicon of design and the development of the urban environment and how that might actually impact health and health equity. And this is a piece that we put together for a project of ours for the East End Women's Museum, which was really about us using practices of collage to rearrange reality and to develop a narrative around our proposal. And, you know, that this was kind of a key idea for us as well, was that the zine should feel a bit like an activity book with opportunities for people to make and create things, and really kind of capitalizing on the opportunity of play to allow us to drop our guardedness and to actually allow us to loosen up and be more creative, which is a really integral step in unlearning. And one of the really key influences for the zine and our proposal, and also for the workshop today, were the games played by surrealists and Dadaists. And they played games like the Exquisite Corpse, which everybody will get a chance to have a go at a little later on at 1 o'clock, as well as games such as collaging. And these were very much ways that the surrealists interacted together to unlearn and to find kind of suspend reality, or at least the constructs of reality. I'll hand over to Karl, who talk a little bit about his SEEDS program that he's doing within the prison system.
Thank you, Ramsey. And again, I'd just like to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. So just to kind of embellish a little bit more on what Ruta said early on, SEEDS Education work with education providers, universities, designers and creatives to teach programs in art, architecture and design in prison. And the process provides an opportunity for students to engage imaginatively with their surroundings whilst promoting ingenuity and new ways of thinking. So again, it's worth saying as well that although we're operating in prison, we teach architecture to a standard set of architectural rules and language. So we use language of the plan, scale, section, we use models, photography. We just have to find more ingenious and playful ways to deliver it and to teach it. So obviously operating inside a prison, we are limited to the materials that we can use. So most of our materials are used from things that we can salvage or we can find on site, which have gone through a set of safety protocols. So cardboard is readily available, which again lends itself very nicely for making models. But this, well, again, on this image here, we're observing what currently exists. So this was an old pigeon shed. So again, this was a space that the boys kept coming back to. So again, we measure it, we find new ways of measuring it. So we use, instead of using tape measures or standard surveying equipment, we use our body parts, we jump, we shout, and we find different ways of actually recording and measuring information, and then we turn it into models. And those models then become part of a bigger set of bigger models, which ended up being a huge site plan. So again, we use model making, we use photography, and again, it's the first time that some of our students have engaged with education at all in some instances. But again, this idea of play or this idea of creativity or being creative is a different way of teaching to what some of these young children have been used to in the past. But the process is a more creative and playful process.
Thanks, Karl.
I think now we're going to hand over to our speakers for a quick discussion.
Hello, everybody. So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper. Obviously, you're just getting a glimpse of the zine at the moment, but I'm quite interested to think a little bit more about the making process and the production of the zine. And this is a conversation that ideally would be open to everyone. It's difficult to do that on this digital forum, but certainly if you have comments or questions, keep adding them to the chat, and hopefully there will be time to pick up on some of these later on. We'll see how time goes. I'm quite passionate as the chair of Play Scotland and otherwise in the power of play. And actually take it quite seriously in a way. There's benefits of play for all ages, and I'm actually particularly interested in how we can, in our older years, I mean older than children and young people, benefit from a playful approach. And the zine is a great example of a playful approach, looking at some pretty heavyweight issues actually in there. And just as an opener, I'd really like to hear a little bit more about how you approach themes, how you establish themes, and how you produce the zine. Certainly, it reminds me, and I've said this already, it reminds me of a lot of pop culture zines, which there are many good examples of how it does engage through a graphical presentation, that sort of loosening up, stepping away, maybe subverting things a little bit. It's a great way of connecting people. I'd just like to hear a little bit more about how you take some heavyweight issues and then, without being flippant about it, how you can then develop that into a zine.
Thanks, Calum. That's a really fantastic question, and maybe I'll kind of just give a short intro to that. But I think both Karl and Francis could really add a lot to that as well. When we were kind of going through a discovery phase or an ideation phase, thinking about what we do as a response to the brief, one of the things that kind of stuck out to us was a project by a photographer called Shea Glover, who did a photographic study of portraits of people, and took a photo and then took a second photo and said, "You're beautiful." And the second photo always was much more beautiful. And that was because there was this moment of unguardedness where people kind of really kind of let go. And that became really interesting to us. You know, there's this kind of moment of within play where you can really let go. And you know, you drop all of those learned things. You know, you drop all of those learned things about posing in a particular way, or not smiling in a photo, or giving the right side of your face to a photo. So we were really interested in how we could reach out to NOOMA Studio and also collaborators and friends of the studio, and actually pass on the brief and say, okay, well, we want to give you a completely unprescribed brief here. You know, you have a spread within the zine, and we'd like you to really kind of just get playful with it and create a spread on absolutely any topic you like. And you know, we really enjoyed the kind of eclecticism and variety that we got in the responses to that brief, and how they kind of came together, and were really representative of a NOOMA conversation or a NOOMA discussion. And you know, I think this is kind of an opportunity maybe for Karl to talk a little bit about that, because, you know, similarly, Karl was one of the people who received that brief and responded with his spread.
Yeah, thanks, Ramsey. Well, I think in regards to the work that we do, I think within the realms of education, I think education has to be engaging from the offset, and dare I say, fun. Now, as a student of architectural education, sometimes fun may not be the words to describe that education, but I think fun, or the creating a space which enables creativity and freedom, which is again something that Ramsey kind of picked on, is what we're trying to achieve. And I think the unlearning, or the trick that we find ourselves with, is that although we're delivering architecture to a kind of standard set of rules, because we haven't got those tools at our disposal, we have to be more creative and more fun in finding new ways or adapting new ways of teaching education. And I think that for us is where the fun part comes in, because again we have to use objects like shower bottles, milk cartons, and we have to be very creative in the way that we can still obtain certain information. But that process of going back, for us, it's more like going back to when we were younger, having to make models out of cereal packets, or having to go and find ingenious ways of making structures or spaces or camps or safe spaces by using objects that are readily available. And that's where I think the engagements and the levels of fun come through with what we're trying to achieve. It's that having to rethink, look at everyday objects and be more creative in ways of using them. And I think that's where the idea of play and fun and creativity and ingenuity and all these kind of skills that we need later on in life come into play, really.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I was actually wondering myself when the fun word would be brought up in relation to play, and I suppose in general, just maybe stepping away from the zine, and it's almost open to anyone just to think about. But I'm really interested in this this relationship between playfulness and the idea of unlearning ideas. So we're not, we're talking about unlearning as a way of learning, and taking away a seriousness as a way of learning, which we called playfulness. I'd be just interested, just intuitively, about people's thoughts on why playfulness is appropriate to an unlearning of ideas.
Well, my initial thoughts on that, Calum, would be, I think playfulness, to an extent, it can kind of remove things like inhibitions, and it can remove blockers or things that may be in the way. So when something becomes more playful, by its very nature, it forces you to kind of think outside the box, and it forces you to think in a different way. And bringing it back to what we do, I think those acts of thinking outside the box, having to be more clever, and again more thinking more outside of the box, enables that kind of a more playful approach to what we're trying to achieve.
Could I add to that as well, Karl?
Yeah.
What another one of the key kind of drivers within our response to unlearning, and the reason it was play, was my daughter's 3 years old at the moment, and she's about to start school. And one of the things I observe about her is that she is constantly playing. Give her absolutely anything and she'll turn it into a game, and she'll play with it, and she's actually learning. That's really what she's doing. And that I had this kind of real concern about the idea that I'm now going to send her to a conventional school where she will be told that you no longer learn through play, but in fact what you do is you sit in a classroom, you have information input into you, and then an output of that is examined at the end of the year, and that measures the success of your kind of educational academic year, which it is very kind of Victorian and industrial in its you know, in its form, in that guise, and you know, it is, you know, very reflective of say a factory floor where, you know, things are mechanistic and that you have inputs and outputs and you measure efficiencies based on that. But actually we really wanted to bring it back to something much more human, and we were like, well, you know, what really is the human way of learning? And we felt the answer to that was play. So that's really where the play idea came into all of this. So, you know, how can we rekindle that childhood playfulness, that childhood way of learning before the kind of societal structures impose, you know, different ways of learning? And we felt that play really was the answer to that.
I think that statement about how we measure things, how we measure our learning is really important there. Because certainly, you know, if I'm thinking about play, play to me is about partaking in something. It might be a physical thing, it might be a mental thing, but it's not necessarily like an act of need. It's not something that you're seen to need to do, but in actual fact, there are outcomes, not necessarily aims. You don't go into it with aim, but it's the outcomes which are essential in terms of what we need. This is all a little bit back to front, but it's the fact of not measuring something that's really important. You're doing it for the sake of doing it, and then you're actually really heavily engaged in that. And outcomes might be about pleasure, might be skill, just reflecting on something, discussing a provocation, you know, even a kind of form of meditation. And I find meditation quite an interesting analogy for play, because my understanding of meditation is it's not about switching off in actual fact, it's about switching on, but being aware of everything around you. And actually, I think, like, thinking about what you're doing, Karl, in the context of prison, all the things that you can't use in order to learn architecture, I think we could all do with a bit of that, really. Just going out with our own bodies and playing with space, and not necessarily measuring it, but just being a bit more free to explore things is definitely beneficial. Yeah.
And Calum, I know that you're the chair of Play Scotland, and do those kind of themes come up at all within your work there?
Well, certainly, and I know I've mentioned this previously, but a lot of the issues that Play Scotland are dealing with are those around privilege and effectively poverty and deprivation. So there is a relationship between our ability to find space to play, whether that be mental ideas, making zines, that's that form of creativity, or physical space to go outside and explore. There is a relationship between privilege and play. And certainly one of the key things that Play Scotland have been involved in is there's a UN convention on the right of children to play. And that, as of March this year, has been incorporated into Scots law. So even in that kind of policy making side, that's such an important inclusion in Scots law. And the UN's right to play is about ensuring that children have the opportunity to. It's about, I'm just actually reading through a little section on it. Grow up in the spirit of peace, dignity, tolerance, freedom, equality, and solidarity. And again, freedom and play, very strong relationship there, because in many ways it's about the ability to have free play, not be made to prescriptively undertake something that they are being demanded of them. So yeah, these are issues that Play Scotland are dealing with all the time, and I can't claim to be on the ground delivering any of that. I'm on the board listening and asking questions and helping as much as possible, but that's very much what Play Scotland are doing. Yeah.
That topic around privilege, access and inclusion to play, and also, you know, that brings up the issue of quality of play as well, it is actually a really important part of the studio discourse. And you know, the reality is that, you know, we're quite interested in, for example, kind of entitlement to green space or entitlement to nature. And we understand that that's very closely linked to issues of privilege, and also kind of a signifier of quality of play as well. And you know, you can often have these issues with less privileged places kind of having very stringent restrictions on play. You know, I know that I personally grew up in a place where there were no ball games signs everywhere around, which is a really frustrating thing as a child, and also, you know, really really oppressive, actually, you know, especially when we kind of understand play in light of it being something that contributes to our development and our growth, not only socially but in many other ways. And I think that maybe before we go into the workshop, that maybe Karl could just say one or two things about the kind of link between privilege and play within your Seeds education program, and how you view that.
Well, I think most of the students that we work with or we teach, again, picking up on some of the language or the words that Calum mentioned, you know, are historically from deprived backgrounds, are historically from big areas of concrete, or big areas where there's no places for play, but there is definitely a link and a correlation between areas of poverty, low achievements in education, and lower life expectancies and opportunities. So we're in a there's definitely a link there, no question. We're just fortunate enough to have a cohort of students from these areas, and it's an opportunity for us to use education to bring about growth, change, transformation, because the benefit that we have is that we know where they are, because they are locked up in a prison. And quite quickly we find that some of our students who haven't engaged with education, well, I mean, we're at a stage now where we have a waiting list of students who want to engage in our kind of education providers, because we are out and about and measuring and using bodies and using play to deliver education. So yeah, I think we're using the kind of concrete and the hard environments of the prison to our advantage as well. But there is definitely a correlation, yes, between poverty, opportunity, and the harshness of some areas, and you know, and the harshness of a prison.
Yeah, great. I'm conscious that we're going to move on to our breakout.
Yes, Calum, I think we're going to hand over to Francis just now to introduce how the workshop and the breakout rooms will function.
Okay, thank you.
And for those who have asked questions, I've seen Neil and Lily have asked a few questions. Hold on to them till the end. Once we come back from the breakouts, we can discuss and chat to the speakers.
Hi, so I'm going to share my screen now, and you guys are welcome to go onto the Miro or to follow me initially via my shared screen. So we're going to participate in a collective personal collective storytelling, exquisite corpse. And we have some examples down here. And also, if you're on the Miro board, you can press on my icon and it will bring you to what I can see currently. So we encourage you to participate by drawing the top, middle and bottom. Think about your response in relation to a memory or a personal story. Story about something you feel you want to unlearn or an experience of unlearning. Or it can also be a memory of being genuinely lost in play. And so your top, middle and bottom don't have to be related to one another. They can be totally independent because we're going to mix and match everybody's drawings at the end to create a new story and a new narrative, which fundamentally is very collaborative. Is a very collaborative way, and it's a great way to, So, yeah, and then also if we go over to the boxes, you'll be able to see there's a red line. So if we can keep the drawings touching these red lines, so that will make it a lot easier to match them up after everyone's finished with their drawing. And if we go over to the left-hand side, we can click on the pen tool. And if you also click onto here, you can change the thickness or the color of the pen. And there's also a highlighter tool, which you can use. And you can change the thickness of this as well. And then if we go to the pen tool, we can draw shape. So if you guys want to pick a box.
Thanks, everyone. I think just to say, Francis, I think once your introduction is over, just so no one gets surprised, we're going to break everyone up into breakout rooms.
Okay, sure.
And just something else to note as well, as a bit of an incentive to the participants. The idea is that we are going to be using your drawings in the next edition of our zine. So no pressure.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
So, Rita, shall I just go through some of the questions that have been dropped?
Of course. Just want to ask everyone before we jump into questions to not forget to add their names to their sketches. So Francis knows exactly which kind of artwork was yours. I'm going to hand over to Calum. Are you okay finding the questions in the chat?
I've got them, yes.
Excellent.
I mean, we've just got a few minutes, really, is that right?
Yeah, just a few minutes. I think if you could focus on the questions and then we can just wrap up, and I'll just have a few seconds at the end for a few words.
So there's interesting comments and or questions in the chat. What we got here, participate by drawing. Nope, that's an instruction. Next one, Neil McGuire. I'm interested in the link between play and subversive behavior and collective subversive behavior. What do the panel think about this? In that some play is heavily directed and mediated and other forms of play are open. So even within play, there can be these closed systems and open systems.
Well, I don't know much about that. Well, I think what I can say is, I think in regards to what we do, I think yes, we talk about play, but there are rules. I think the rules are loose, but nevertheless there are some form of rules there. But again, as far as the question for in my experience, I don't know enough about that. But like I say, I mean, although we're learning through play, there are a set of loose rules in what we do.
I mean, I think that's really interesting. I'm personally very interested in the idea of subversion, and you know, I think that that maybe there's something kind of interesting there in looking at something like anarchy as a concept, around that being a form of play that's an open system that's really there to really encourage you know, different methods of play, but in a very subversive way. And I think that can really weave into that conversation. I don't know if we have enough time to go into too much detail on that, but I think it was a great question and could have opened up a very, very in-depth answer, I think.
Neil, do you have a one-line comment to make on your thoughts on closed and open play?
Not particularly. No, I was kind of interested in what people thought about just about the relationship between the two, because I think also rules as well, like Karl was maybe saying, can actually be quite liberating in some ways, depending on kind of how they're used, or give something to kind of push against as well. So I guess it's that kind of like, what I was interested in was that kind of like push and pull factor, and how these kind of things related to each other. But yeah, no, I think there's a kind of bigger sort of question there as well. But no, thanks for the responses. And
it's interesting how sometimes rules help us to play, just like a slide or a swing in a play park, maybe an instigator of some sort of play. Sometimes it's prescriptive, but we might take it in a different direction. But if we're left to be completely free, we sometimes don't have enough to respond to. Or it's interesting thoughts. I think we also reinforce seriousness on each other as adults. Do we need to actively encourage each other to be playful? Give each other permission? And I think that's as good a comment as a question, just to throw that in there. And that really actually connects nicely into a question that I didn't get to answer, to ask even. And I think maybe as a way of almost summing up and taking away from this, and for us all to think about, is how we might take forward notions of play and on learning in our professional industry, which is often fairly, I've written down, turgid organizational structures, and sometimes it's not seen as being appropriate to be subversive or playful, but we all appreciate, I think, how helpful that sort of subverting and shape-shifting through play can help us explore ideas and break down ideas and move on. So I think it would be really nice almost to maybe think about some of these things, whether it be through the zine or just in our own thoughts or projects going forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, we have a real interest in NOOMA in how do we create a studio environment where people can feel comfortable and can feel comfortable to be themselves and feel comfortable to play. And we're very interested in that, you know, creating a really nurturing and fostering environment that really is about, you know, people being themselves as before anything else, and play definitely comes into that, you know.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. I think I just wanted to first of all thank Ramsey, Francis, Karl and Calum for the talk, especially Ramsey and Francis for the zine and producing all the work for your project of Lost in Play. As we mentioned throughout this talk, the project is continuously developing, and this workshop will act as kind of catalyst to the next iteration of zine. And hopefully we're going to just keep seeing more and more information appearing on our new Spatial Realities website. Check it out and keep looking at it. There's going to be things popping up. Also follow us on social media, follow all the contributors on social media, and definitely want to thank all the sponsors and our supporters of the festival. If you would like to support Architecture Fringe more, we have a Patreon link on our website. And please look out for our program. The festival is still going into this coming weekend. So we still have a lot of talks and contributions to see, but hopefully this was a really exciting day to let go and play a little bit. Thank you.